Good morning and welcome to my lounge. I've come inside today because I've been invited to make a video about knots, and it seemed easier to do that inside, and I also wanted to do an instruction. We're going to be playing with string and rope and tying knots in them, and once upon a time, many days ago when I was a boy, every young boy had a piece of string and a penknife in his pocket and would play around, and probably went to the Scouts or the Boys Brigade and learnt knots. Nowadays they seem to just be playing games on their mobile phones, and fun though that may be, I think something has been lost. Just a quick safety point with rope: never ever put it round your neck or anyone else's. I remember as a school teacher coming into my classroom to be horrified to find a young girl standing on a chair waving at her friends out of the window whilst absent-mindedly playing with the beaded string that operated the roller blind, and she was just wrapping it round her neck like a necklace and dangling it there, and it had all the potential of absolute disaster. So please do avoid putting any string round yours or anyone else's neck. Knots are incredible things. There are thousands of them, but you can get away with knowing just a few and they will do the job and do it very well. Each knot really is designed for a particular use, and most of them have found application or been invented in the areas of sailing, when there were sailing ships and people in modern yachts, and climbing. I'm not a very experienced climber. I did a little bit in my teens and I learnt a few knots due to that as well. And knots have changed as well according to the type of cordage we use. The old hemp ropes have given way to nylon ropes, which require different types of knots. And of course fishing, attaching a hook to your fishing line, attaching your line to your reel, all require good knots. And I also want to do a little bit about the terminology of knots, so that when we're talking about them you understand what I'm speaking about, and hopefully you'll be able to tie some good knots. I intend to make this the first of a series of probably 3 or 4. I won't do them one after the other, otherwise you'll die of boredom. But they are fun to do, and the only way to really learn a knot is to practice and practice it. Carry a piece of string with you, and wherever you are, just practice tying knots. And being able to use the right knot in the right place gives you a sense of superiority over the next guy. Hope you enjoy the video. I had a good rummage in my garage and found this, which is actually a piece of safety line used in water sports. It's polypropylene, it floats, but it's thick enough to see what I'm doing, whereas you can tie knots with any type of rope or string, but thick rope makes it easier to see when teaching, and also quite easy when practicing. A few bits of terminology. This end, the end I'm doing knots in and playing with, this is known as the working end. The rest of it is known as the standing end. All that's I'm not using. This is known as a bite, where you put a kink in the rope. That's known as a bite. And a loop is where the rope crosses over itself. That's known as a loop. Using that terminology should make life fairly easy to explain what I'm doing. Knowing how to tie a knot helps you to know how to undo it, and it's good to have knots that are easy to undo, because it means you don't have to cut your rope and waste a precious resource. If you watched my video on making string, then it's hard work and you don't want to waste it. Nearly everybody knows how to tie at least one knot. This knot. Make a loop, bring the working end back through the loop and pull tight. That's sometimes known as an overhand knot or a stopper knot. And a stopper knot because if you're pulling it back through a hole, it stops it there. That's quite useful. But that makes the basis of many other knots, and I'm going to teach a few other knots that are related to that. The first one related to that is the double overhand loop. Make a bite and tie an overhand knot as you loop, bring it back through and pull it, and you've made a closed loop, which you could use to hook over things, to attach to things. Very useful. Always tidy your knots up. As you can see, it's nice and neat. If you tidy them up, you can see how to undo them, and undoing that one is very easy. That can just be pushed that way, that is pushed that way, and it comes undone quite well. If you put a lot of load on that, however, it does become very difficult to tighten, to undo, having tightened down on you, and there are better knots to use in that situation. Another knot not used very often in Britain is the Canadian jam knot. If we make a bight, a fairly big bight, bring them together, and with the working end, tie an overhand knot around the standing line. Leave yourself quite a lot of end on the working end, and as you can see, this is a slip knot. So if you put any tension on that, it'll tighten. Now that has a use, but not if you're wrapping it round your waist, obviously. Now that's not a Canadian jam knot. Canadian jam knot ends up when you put an overhand knot, not round the line, but in the working end. Another use of a Canadian jam knot is to tighten together some logs, which you then want to wrap and do some lashings with. But here we've got our rope going round the logs. We put our overhand knot going back in the direction of the standing line, put a knot in the end of our working end, and when we pull, you'll notice that the overhand knot becomes a jam knot, and when I cinch that down, that's quite tight. It's not going to come undone until I do that. The last knot I want to show you using the overhand knot is what's called a fisherman's knot. Originally used by fishermen to join the ends of two different ropes, so you can make a rope longer doing this. The rope have to be the same diameter. There are issues caused if they're not. So put the two ropes together and I tie an overhand knot in one rope around the other, and then an overhand knot in the other rope around the first one. When you pull them together, can you see how they nestle together? And they'll tighten on each other and they won't come undone. You can make it even more secure using a double fisherman's knot, but that's a little more complicated to tie, and at this stage I won't demonstrate that. The other thing you can do with this is you can make a loop. Now I've actually got about 2 meters of rope here, and as you can see, that's turned it all into a loop, and you could make that into a smaller loop for something like through the hole in a penknife to make a lanyard, through a compass, and I've got one on the end of my folding saw, and it's very easy to undo. Pull that apart and just push it through, and out it comes. Obviously it's more difficult to undo with thinner string. Here we can see a couple of applications of the fisherman's knot. Here's my compass lanyard, and that is formed using a fisherman's knot there, and on my folding saw there's a small loop there which helps in getting it out of its sheath, and also hanging it up somewhere on a branch or somewhere useful just to keep it out the way so I don't lose it. And there's the fisherman's knot as well. All of those knots are based on a simple overhand knot, and if you can tie that, you can tie any of those knots. You just have to think about where you're tying them. I also want to recommend a really good resource. I'm not an expert on knots, and I've found this little handbook, a Collins Gem All You Need to Know Knots, very, very helpful. It's very well laid out. it puts the knots together in different ways, uses different coloured rope to show you how things are made. I've found it helpful. I've learnt a lot from it, and I've learnt a lot making this video, because as always, when you teach something, you learn something. Hope you've enjoyed that. See you soon. Stay safe, and God bless you.